Good afternoon, everybody. It feels very strange to be wearing this strange side mic, so I hope you can hear me. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming along to listen to our discussion over the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to have a chat about some of the issues around talent and skills, and we're going to open up to some questions towards the end. So I really would urge you to take this opportunity to put any questions you have on the topic to this fantastic panel that you're going to be hearing from shortly. Now, I think we would probably all agree that this is as exciting a time as there has ever been to be working in technology. I've been a technology journalist for 15 years, and it's certainly there's more interesting things and exciting things to write about in this area now than there has ever been in that time. Yeah, if I look back over those 15 years, if there's one topic that has really never changed, that has been consistent throughout that time, it's one of skill shortages. You could take a headline from 15, probably 20 or 25 years ago about skill shortages in IT, use that headline today, and it still be just as relevant. Despite all the excitement there is about technology, it's forecast that, for example, across the European Union, by 2020, there will be a shortage of as many as 900,000 people needed to work in IT. We still haven't found the ways to try and address those. You might say, well, hey, there's a next generation coming up. This is the most tech-savvy generation we've got coming through. Yeah, again, if you look at the stats, the number of students taking A-levels in the UK in computer science has dropped year on year consistently for at least the last 10 years. The number of graduates taking computer science degrees has dropped. And in fact, computer science graduates are nearly twice as likely than any other subject to still be without a job 6 months after they graduate. So why is this? There is a little bit of ray of light on the horizon. The new GCSE computing curriculum that started last year led to a 4-fold increase in the number of children opting to take that at GCSE level, which obviously gives us some hope for the future. But we're going to be talking now about what do we need to do at all levels to address this huge and growing skill shortage, and what can we do to get more people into it. I'm going to leave each of our panellists to introduce themselves and their organisations in a little more detail as we come to the first question, but I'll join them over here for now. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along. Welcome up onto the stage. So let's start on this topic where skills start, and that's in schools. We've seen a big focus in schools over the last couple of years or so, development of the new GCSE computing curriculum, as I mentioned, which seems to have been a positive thing. But you read surveys and analyses that say, young children still don't see IT as a career or something they want to study at A-level stage. It's been dropping year on year. I'd be interested to get your perspectives on whether we're doing the right things, whether new initiatives are making a difference, what more we need to do. I'll start off by coming to Nick Harrison from Founders for Schools. Nick, you work in this area most closely. Perhaps give us a little introduction to yourself and a perspective on what's happening.
Sure. My name's Nick Harrison. I'm the CEO of Founders for Schools. We exist really as an organisation so that we can put inspirational business leaders, founders and entrepreneurs into schools so that we can help inspire them for the future, and we have a network of about 9,000 inspirational speakers in our on it. So in terms of addressing the gap in schools, where our organisation puts all of these founders in there, but the computing curriculum is incredibly important. That's fantastic for the future. It's a starting point though. It's not enough on its own, and we need a lot more to happen. I think the introduction of the careers and enterprise business by the government that's headed by Claudia Harris is going to do education wonders. In terms of computing itself, we've got a lot of companies within an ecosystem that's built over the last couple of years. From my perspective, we've seen businesses, whether it's through corporates, whether it's technology companies, suddenly realizing that actually we need to give back some of the skills that we've got. So we have almost an ecosystem of companies like Code Club, like Founders for Schools, and lots of others that really are starting to help open the eyes of children.
Julian, again, a brief introduction to yourself and your organisation, but your perspective on this, and especially as somebody who's coming from a training background, and there's been such a focus in schools around coding training and things like that, teaching kids coding. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Bryan. My name's Julian Wragg. I head up EMEA operations for Pluralsight. Pluralsight, I hadn't heard of a year ago, and I've been in the online learning industry for 27 years before it was even online. But we're a market leader in the provision of IT developer, IT professional, and IT creative training delivered online on demand. And getting to your question, Brian, I think there's a huge disconnect between what companies require and what education is actually delivering. And while many companies are making strides in this area, and I know the government's making strides in this area, we've got to look more to primary schools. And I think the one area that we are missing is teachers. Kids are being pushed. In fact, at Pluralsight, we offer kids courses for free via our website. Any kid worldwide has access to our courses for free. And we're starting to offer our courses free of charge for teachers as well. And we're doing that in the US. We'd like to do it here in the UK as well. And I think that's where the disconnect is actually with the teachers themselves. My son's been doing a BTEC IT course, and the subjects he was learning were 3, maybe 4 years behind. And I was showing him what's in the world now, and it's a big difference, big difference.
Mark, you work with an organisation whose heritage back into the days of eSkills UK was very much about reaching out into schools and from the perspective of employers. Again, perhaps a little bit of introduction to the Tech Partnership, who you're involved with now, and what have you found in talking to schools?
Well, I have the great pleasure to work for, as far as I can make out, an organisation which is unique in the whole world. I really haven't been able to find something like it. It's a collaboration of employers who come together. We've only been in existence since last November, 500 strong already and growing. Organisations who in many cases are employers who are fiercest of competitors, who leave their competitive hats at the door when they come together to deal with an issue which we all share in common, which is the skills shortage. I mean, Phil is our chair. He comes and meets with people with whom he competes day in, day out. I'm sure he puts his competitive hat back on when he leaves. But at that moment, we are all trying to deal together with an issue which we all face. So the Tech Partnership is a unique collaboration of employers to do exactly that. One of the key areas that we all know we need to work in is bringing together much more the education world and the world of work and employers. Historically, education has been seen as something that lives over here, and the world of work is something that lives over here. That is no longer good enough. So the Tech Partnership has collaborated to do all sorts of things, all the way from developing programs in schools which encourage girls in particular, for example, to want to come into, to get into interest in technology and stay interested. We know from evidence that about 14 years old they get turned off because it's all about smelly boys. So how do we get girls into it? And that's very important because only 17% of the tech professional workforce in this country is female. Well, no wonder we have a skills shortage if we're fishing in half the gender pool. So all the way through from that into making sure that the curriculum is suitable and that the schools themselves have the resources that they need to inspire young people into careers. And it's employers who are doing that, not people who are sitting in a room like me, but academics. It's done by employers, building those bridges between education and work. That's making the difference.
Yeah, indeed. And Phil, obviously, you're involved heavily with the Tech Partnership, and I know with your Cisco, your hats on as well, you've done a lot of work with schools and young people. A quick introduction to yourself, but also, what do you hear when you go into schools and look at the problems that they face there getting kids into computer science?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm Chief Executive of Cisco in the UK and Ireland. As far as I'm concerned, the battle over the next 20 years is for skills. I mean, that's what it's all about. Talent. How am I going to get the talent? How am I going to keep it? How am I going to keep the best? How am I going to actually get all of the talent? I mean, as Mark clearly said, my gender mix is not as high as it should be in Cisco, so I'm clearly not getting the 50% of people who are female who are in the workforce. So I've got to do something about that, and I've got to do that if I'm going to be competitive. The point I think that's been made across here is a really important one, which is it's a multifaceted thing. It's not just the schools, it's not just the teachers, it's businesses, it's parents, it's everyone that we have to address here. And I think the reality is that we've got to somehow change the brand of doing things in technology in some way, so that when a young person who's 16, who's very talented at maths and whatever, in some kind of vaguely technological area, but even without that, but someone who's got propensity, that the automatic view from either the careers advisor or the teacher or the parent is, why don't you go and be an accountant, or why don't you go and be someone in finance, and say, well, why don't you go and work in technology? There's loads of jobs in technology. They're really interesting, great careers, and we've not got that yet. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I think industry have to get really stuck in and get role models out there that can help people to see why you would want to do that.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there. I was involved recently with a program with reaching out to school children to try and find out who, to find role models for school children. We went into some schools and said to a bunch of like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, who do you think of? What do you think of when you see somebody working in IT? And it was still, even at that age, it was, it's somebody with a beard. They probably don't have many friends. They play computer games a lot. It's not just that kids don't want to study technology. It's that employers are not presenting them with an image that makes them think, I want to work in IT for you as an employer. Yeah. Mark, this is core to what you do at the Tech Partnership, of course. What more do employers need to be doing to show some leadership, to reach out to schools, to get more collaboration going?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot more of that now already through the collaboration that I talked about with the Tech Partnership. One of the things that's very clear is that lots of individual employers have engaged with schools off their own bat because they realise that it was necessary to do so. What it hasn't necessarily added up to is the sum of the parts. And when people come together, we can start to work out, we're overrepresented here, we're underrepresented here, and start to make sure that we actually collaborate in a way that actually works. And I think one of the interesting things is when you talk about bringing schools and employers closer together, that works all the way through the education system. Because, of course, it's not just in schools that needs to happen, it's also in universities. So, for example, as you mentioned, too many people come out of university with computer science degrees and can't get jobs. Yep. And that's because they haven't learnt the things when they're at university that the employers need. So we need to address that, and we are doing so. We've, again, with employers, we've developed this thing called IT Management for Business degree. And people are coming out of those degrees and they're getting 100% employment. And the reason they're getting 100% employment is because it was the employers who defined what the degree should contain. It was employers who accredited the universities to deliver it. So what you start to see is employers involved. I mean, I can start boring the audience talking about employers all the time, but it is what it is. Yeah. Employers all the way from the beginning, defining what these things are about, what the courses should look like from school to universities, making sure that people have the skills to deliver those courses. And that really makes a huge, demonstrable, measurable difference.
Phil, you're a big IT employer, a very successful IT employer. What has worked for you when you've been, going out to schools and trying to get more collaboration with education? What you found has had results?
Well, I think the biggest thing is getting people out who the individuals can relate to. So if I can get my young staff, particularly my graduates and my apprentices and my young women who are working in Cisco, to go out and be part of whether it's everything from one of the programs like ITMB, but also like Young Enterprise or whatever, but being out there telling young people that actually it's quite interesting in business, and that someone who looks quite normal can actually be working in business and so on. So those have been very successful. I think also to Mark's point, and also the speakers, I've done a bunch of speakers to schools things where I've gone out, and you can see some schools completely switched on, got it all sorted. Others never heard from business in their life. Genuinely, because the teachers probably haven't, to their, difficult to do, but haven't had exposure to business. The businesses haven't been in there. And so what chance have they got really to grow it, let alone the parents who probably haven't had, many of them haven't had exposure to big business. And so why would they be able to discuss those kind of issues? So I think we've been most successful when we've got out, got our sleeves rolled up and got stuck in. And I think that's what everybody has to do, to be honest.
Nick, similarly, the organisation you're running, works a lot to try and connect people in education with people in business. Again, what works, what mistakes have been made, what more would you like to see happening?
I think that we've had people from very small businesses who are entrepreneurs who are very enthusiastic about going in and talking out and saying, hi, this is what we do. We've also had some representative of some very large corporates as well, and big businesses. And it really is, I think you're right, Phil, getting people, the young graduates in there so that they can say, the funny thing is we've been into lots of schools, and when they actually find out what business is about, or particularly IT or computing, if you actually link studying one subject and seeing what they could do, they're kind of like, what you mean, if I study that, I can do that. So there's a lot of that. Yeah. But also, I think doing things that, as I say, there's this ecosystem growing. There are lots of organisations that I think are helping bubble this up. The teachers find it really hard because, from our perspective, we see them as probably some of the busiest people on the planet. They don't have any time. They are sold at in such a large way. So getting through that and actually helping them understand, what their students could see, opening their eyes and almost removing the blinkers. It's a great way of doing it. It's hard though. Our hardest task is getting to the teachers and actually making them understand. The curriculum changes help. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah. And Julian, I mean, as a training company, I'm sure you've had plenty of experience of companies coming to you and saying, we've got this bunch of new graduates or school leavers coming in. We now need you to train them. That's clearly saying there's a gap between what the employers want and the skills that children coming out of education with. From an employee perspective, what would you like those employers to be doing to bridge that gap, apart from buying training?
From my perspective, I think a lot more companies, not enough companies, are taking responsibility for the whole life cycle. They're thinking that training starts when an employee joins their company. And of course, they're now realizing that, hang on, what can we do for primary schools and secondary schools and universities so that by the time they come into full-time employment, they've got skills which are relevant to our business. And sadly, there's still a small minority. Some great companies doing that, but I think it's a minority that are doing that. So I think I'd like to see more companies being encouraged to work with those kind of, the primary schools particularly, need to get going at the ground level. And I think we owe it to primary schools to actually make the IT market exciting. I look at my kids and I'm wondering, do they see me working in IT as, boring and sitting behind a desk and all they see is me behind my two screens, and they're not quite sure what I do all day. Sometimes I don't know either, but I think we need to make it exciting and make them realize that IT is not just about coding, it's about being creative, and as Phil said in the last presentation, it's about the Internet of Things, about where it's going to be in the next few years. Yeah. It's going to impact everything.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect cue for the next question I wanted to ask. So thank you for that. That wasn't here pre-rehearsed. Okay. Moving on from the situation we have now with schools and children, and looking a little to the future. And Phil, I'll come to you on this one. You did talk just now in your talk about things like the Internet of Things. Technology world is changing at an incredible pace. We need skills now that 5 years ago people could barely have envisaged. There will be technologies and developments five years from now that we can barely envisage now. How do we go about better identifying the skills we're going to need 5 years, maybe even 10 years in the future, and making sure that we're putting in place the pathways now to have the people with the skills that we're going to need in the future?
So I think it's not easy, obviously, because we don't necessarily know what specific jobs are going to be, but I do think we have to build some of the basic capabilities in there. And some of those basic capabilities are people understanding technology at the basic level. How does technology actually work? How does it affect me? And as we just said by Nick and Julian, the fact is that as many more industries get touched by this, it becomes more relevant. So if you're happen to come from a farming background and you say, well, actually that's interesting, maybe some technology could have an effect on me. So potentially it's going to make it a little bit more relevant to people, the jobs they know might be affected by technology. But how do we actually think about them? I think a lot of it's going to be about thinking about flexibility in jobs, probably thinking about changing jobs as we go through our lives. Whereas that probably wasn't our parents' generation, probably thought, I'm going to do a job and that be it for life. If I had a good example of that, when I sit down with the graduates from my team every year, and I sort of ask them, they ask me questions about Cisco and ask them how they're getting on and whatnot. And the very first question I got from the first graduate was, how are you going to keep me here in 3 years' time? And of course, when I was a graduate, it was like, thank you for the job, It was totally different. Now, he didn't mean it in any kind of arrogant, he was just saying, my view is I'm going to do a job and then in 3 years' time I'll probably move into something else. So what are you going to do at Cisco that's going to be attractive to them? So I think we've got to be continually thinking about adapting now, about people having jobs that are relevant for different stages in their life, different stages in their career. And particularly if we do want to attract, and I desperately do want to attract more women into technology, we're going to have to look for many people who go through different phases in their life, what kind of jobs work for them, whether there's jobs that are maybe more flexible at different times in their career. And I think with the new technologies coming along, I think it's going to bring a much wider set of opportunities that people can engage with all the time. But I think flexibility is key to it, and probably still some of the basics that we need to have.
Yeah. And, Mark, when you've got this great situation with all these competitors in a room together, all talking about how they can work together, how do you all put together a plan for, what are the skills we're going to need in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and deliver on that?
Well, none of us have a crystal ball, that's for sure, and it's not easy looking into the future. One thing we can do, and what people are doing though, is to start developing more flexible ways of bringing people into the workforce. We've been talking about graduates quite a lot. We haven't talked about apprenticeships. Now, just a few years ago, there were practically no apprenticeships in technology whatsoever. Apprenticeships were for hairdressers and for construction things, not for technology. Now, over the last 3 years, almost 30,000 people have started an apprenticeship in the technology area. And just in the last 2 years, something like 300, not a huge number, but 300 have come into cybersecurity. Cybersecurity no one worked in cybersecurity until recently. Now they're apprentices in cybersecurity. And as we begin to develop and we learn more about the way in which we're flexing, we're growing, and the technologies are changing, I think the whole apprenticeship route is going to become more and more important, and people will be coming into those apprenticeships, into those new emerging technological areas.
Interesting point about apprentices as well is we find it, and when I went over to Germany recently with the commission to look at the German system of apprenticeships, and when you talk to Siemens over there, and I had the same experience when I talked to BAE over here, their graduates at 3 to 4 years, they lose roughly 30% of the graduates. Their apprenticeships, they lose less than 5%. Yeah. So apprentices are much more loyal in general because they're built right up through the system. Yeah. Often will stay for 10 years or more in companies. So it's kind of an interesting change.
Yeah. Interesting. Julian, you're having to plan what training skills, what skills you're going to need to train for in 5, 10 years. What works for you as somebody who has to plan training, and what could employers copy that you do in terms of being able to forecast the skills they need?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when I started in this industry, I was looking at training COBOL and MVS, and those are skills that lasted for 3-5 years. Nowadays, skills last for 3 months, 6 months. How long are they relevant for? A very, very short period of time. So it's really important, particularly for us, the company, that we stay really up to date. And we do that by speaking directly with the companies like Cisco, like Microsoft, like Google, to find out what technologies are coming down the line. And we have over 500 of the world's leading technical authors that are alerting us to technologies which are coming on within the next few months, so that we can prepare and be at the lead. But that's difficult. It takes a lot of resource to do that. We're managing that. We're releasing 5-10 new courses every day just to keep up. And that's a huge commitment. But it just means staying very close to the market, finding out what technologies are coming and anticipating those.
So Nick, moving away from the big corporates, Founders for School, I know, has got a heritage with the startup community. And the startup community, of course, are among the ones who are developing the innovations and the technologies and the software that probably are going to change the skills that are going to be needed in 5 or 10 years. Yeah. What can we learn from that sort of environment that starts to point us towards what we're going to need in future?
The interesting thing is that I think a lot of the startups use, and they prey on the latest of technologies because they can move very quickly and be very adept. Julian brings up an important point that skills don't last long. They have, not calling it a shelf life, but they disappear and evolve and change very quickly. And one conversation I was involved in a few weeks ago was around about the fact that university courses are set over a very long period of time, and that's almost too long to evolve with it. And they're having to adapt very quickly. And you saying that you're adding 10 courses a day, it's very reflective. That the one thing that we tried to do as well as putting business leaders in schools is also trying to get people to go along to careers events as well, so that the companies, whether they be big or small, can start to talk about the world of work and how those skills might be used in certain environments. I suppose in a way it's historically, whenever you've had milk rounds, they've been very big, a bit like this, lots and lots of very big organisations looking to get the brightest graduates. But interestingly, what I think schools in particular are looking for is bringing some of those into their own environment, so that they've got the capacity to show them what or how technologies are being used. I suppose we're more the introductory mechanism than the setter. but having almost like a silicon milk roundabout, being, I suppose, staged in a school or a small environment where you've got lots of entrepreneurial souls and businesses, will change the way that people think about careers in the schools themselves, and just show them really what companies can do and how you can use the technology and the skills that we've got.
And just a little follow-on to that, if I may. You talked a lot there about entrepreneurship. How important is it, do you think, that we need to be teaching entrepreneurial skills to
massively
as well?
And I think this is part of it, because what we often do is put some very successful business people, be it from very large organisations or small, into schools, and they actually talk about their life journey. And it's almost an inspiring. We're going outside STEM here. We're going. It's okay to fail. A speaker can talk about their entire journey and what they've done to become successful, how they've failed, how they've faltered, but look what they've won, or an idea that came out of something that was a mistake. And I think that's important in getting the young realising that, it's not just being a doctor, it's not just being a nurse, it's not being, I suppose, the historical jobs that have been talked about, and showing them that actually, if they study certain subjects, they can do anything.
Yeah.
And it gives them, I think, it inspires them. It's really a platform for inspiring, and they're willing to be inspired. I know that as a result of the work that we've done, it's trebled the number of students that have opted to study a STEM subject, which we're hoping will continue for a long time.
Next question, Julian, I'll put to you first, if I may. There's a bit of a strange dichotomy coming around in the digital world at the moment. Over the last few weeks, at Computer Weekly, we've written about companies including Boots, HSBC, Standard Chartered, Lloyds Bank, a number of others, all of whom saying, well, we're getting rid of thousands of jobs, and the reason we're getting rid of these thousands of jobs is because we're going digital. And there's this theme emerging, correctly or incorrectly, that technology and IT automation is going to wipe out thousands of jobs. There's going to be a cull of middle class white collar jobs as a result of technology. In the history of technology, that's never actually been the case. Technology has never taken out swathes, it's created jobs as well. But what has always happened is where there's been a big change, like we're going through now, there has been a gap between old skills being gotten rid of and new skills being discovered. That's a training issue. That's a massive training issue. And of course, we're coming off the back of economic hard times, where the reality is that as soon as things get difficult, the first bit of the budget that most organisations cut is training. Just how much of a gap is there in training for existing employees, not for kids in school, not for graduates coming through. What are we doing wrong, and what more do we need to do to make sure we're giving the skills to our existing employees that they're going to need so they can fill some of these opportunities?
From my experience, there are still many companies who are set in the 1960s in their approach to training. Many companies still have a sort of command and control type structure where the training managers are in charge of training, and you will do the training course that I want you to do when I want you to do it. Now I'm exaggerating to make the point, but that command and control is still very strong. And I think the better companies, the more forward-thinking companies, are those that understand the business needs and they can connect the IT professionals to their business. But we still see too many training departments that are fixated on time spent learning and days spent learning and weird metrics like that. And what we've done is looked at how are today's IT professionals actually working and learning. And, these are pretty fickle lot. They want learning on the go. They want learning at the point of need. And a lot of training departments don't get that. Your typical developer might be sitting doing his work, and he comes up against a problem. He's not going to email or phone his training manager and say, can I go on a training course in 6 weeks' time, please? He wants an answer right now, right there and then, at the point of need. Where's he going to go? He's going to go to his mobile, he's going to go to his iPad, he's going to go online, and he's going to look for that answer there and then. And that might be he might spend 10 or 20 minutes learning, but he'll have that problem solved there and then. And he gets back to his work. What does the training department see? Oh, this guy's only done 20 minutes of learning today. What's going wrong? So we've got to look at it from the IT professional's perspective. Point of need, on the go, on demand. That's what IT professionals need today. And I think what's required is a shift of focus, a shift of attitude, if you like, within companies to recognize that IT professionals are working and learning in many different ways. Over 76% of our users are using our learning outside working hours. The majority of them are accessing it on their mobile devices. I've heard of people, they'll have some learning on one screen and they're doing their work on the other screen. That's right at the point of need. So I think the more that training departments and companies can understand how an IT professional is learning, the better the solutions will be.
I mean, do you agree, Nick? Is it a cultural thing when it comes to training? Have we just got to accept the fact that training is now down to the individual to drive their needs, or do employers still have a responsibility for making sure that their employees are going to have the digital skills they need for the future?
No, I think that there's probably a combination there. I know that, and I've run businesses in the past where developers or IT professionals have learnt on the go, as you said, Julian. They tend to power themselves outside of working hours. We've got things like Stack Overflow to find answers to learn, or indeed online learning products. But I think, and it differs by industry a lot as well. If you look at the smaller businesses, they tend to operate and the individuals learn at a pace. In the larger organisations where you've got much larger workforces, you have to sometimes employ different standards or different programs to make sure they're, particularly with pieces like hardware, that software is different. So I think it differs, but I think it's required. It has to be at all levels. Some employers have a far better program or approach to it. They want their staff to learn. Others are willing just to let them sit as is, which isn't right, really.
Phil, as a big technology company, I'm sure inevitably you've got fantastic training programs for your employees. I'm sure there's no issue there, but in many ways the people are most affected by this are your customers. In the nicest possible way, it's your technology in a way that's putting a lot of these people out of work. But nonetheless, you're going to still need those customers to have the future digital skills that they're going to need to be able to buy your next generation of technology. When you're out talking to customers in particular, perhaps more than what you do internally in Cisco, what do you see as the attitude towards training at the moment, and do you think it needs to be improved?
Yeah, I think in general it probably does need to be improved. I think most people recognise that it's something that needs to be delivered probably in a different way, as Julian and Nick were describing, more on demand, because that's the way we all live now. We live from our phones and our iPads and so on, so we want things in that way. Certainly internally we have lots of TED type talk things, 15-minute sound bites of information, and a lot of customers, we actually share a lot of the stuff with them, because again, to the point I was making earlier, we know that it's a strategic limitation for us. If our customers can't train and absorb the technology, then it's a limitation for us over time. So I think that most customers are using great organizations to train, but they've definitely changed the nature of the way they do that over the years. They want it in a different way. Still want sometimes classroom based, they sometimes want online based, but they probably want a mix of it that fits much better with what they want, and they probably want it in a form that's more relevant to what they're doing at the time. So if I'm contextually, can I bring something up just before I do it, or can I bring it up at the time, or can even use new technologies to do it, sort of augmented reality type things, hold it up and see what a wiring diagram should look like, all that sort of thing. So I think there's great opportunities for training to use that, and I think most customers are recognising that, like we do and like the others do, that a skilled workforce is a tremendous advantage, and there are ways of getting that skill now, in a more dynamic and more online way than maybe there ever was in the past. So, I think that's definitely a big trend.
Yeah. And similar question to you in a way, Mark. I mentioned this figure earlier on of 900,000 IT jobs across the EU going to be needed by every year by 2020. Most of those jobs are in the customers of the industry rather than in the industry. Most of them are in what we would call end users. How much, when you sit around the table with all the technology companies that are involved in the tech partnership, how much of an awareness is there among those about about what needs to be done to train people up to fulfill the jobs that your customers are going to need, and what can the industry do to help them do that?
Well, I think there's a huge and growing recognition because there is sometimes a tendency to think about all of this in terms of young people coming into the workforce because that's such a hugely important thing because we've got an aging workforce and we need to address that. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget those people who are already in the business and whose jobs sometimes, as you say, through technology become redundant, but new skills are needed. Now, the Tech Partnership, just as an example, recognising this, has established a thing called the Tech Partnership Training Fund, £10 million, which is available to give up to 50% discount for employers to train their staff. Now, one of the interesting things that's come about through, this has only been going for a few months, is the number of companies that are coming forward saying, we want to train some of our sometimes older workers whose jobs are becoming, as it were, redundant, so we don't have to get rid of them, so they can become upskilled. Because they don't want to lose these people, right? These are people who they want to keep, who are loyal to the company, who have all sorts of skills, but don't have the tech skills. And so they need to train them up, and they're using the fund to do that. So I think that was almost a surprise to us, but a very welcome one.
Yeah, good. See how we're doing for time? We're doing all right? I'm going to put one more question to the panel, and then I'm going to open out to the floor for anybody who has questions. So if you've got questions, please have them prepared. Nick, we've been talking about schools, you've been talking about training. Let's just say that all the work that's going on in schools, all the work to deliver better training, let's just say that works. Let's say it works perfectly. Chances are that's going to, but likelihood is that's not really going to address the skills gap for at least 5 years, maybe even 10 years if you're looking at 14-year-olds and coming through when they're making their choices at GCSEs. We nonetheless still have a short-term need for more people. We still have skill shortages. Every recruitment agent I talk to says they can't find enough agile software development skills, for example. There are still huge areas of shortage. So let's say all these long-term things work perfectly. But what have we got to do in the short term, immediately now, to make a difference tomorrow, not the day after?
I think there are probably a short-fire list of things that can be done. That's encouraging visas to bring in other people from the EU and from around the world. You know, London and the UK is a great place to work. So that's certainly one. Silicon Milk Roundabout, where we encourage lots of people to come and look at the jobs that are available. If we could echo or amplify the number of the roundabouts that happen, it attracts thousands of people. The interesting thing is, and just on a side point, we're seeing at those, and I was actually at the last one at the Truman Brewery in Shoreditch, that people are jumping professions to come and work in IT. So you've got scientists, biologists, microbiologists, all sorts, using their data and analytical skills to become data scientists. That's just one point. I also think that we've got courses like General Assembly, where they can take either people privately and train them up in the areas or the skills that they're required, or corporates can use them too. We've got decoders helping lots of organisations, large and small, about coding or computing and IT skills. There's also, I think, the Startup Institute that helps train people get into jobs. I think there are quite a few things we can do now as a short fire, almost as I've described them, ecosystem plays that will help. Longer term, I think it requires a lot more effort from both government, from business, and the educational establishment.
Because it's interesting, you see all around the world, if you look at things like some of the MOOCs, for example, in the US, they're being used predominantly to train people who are teachers and others who want to come into technology. And I had a young lady who came up to me after my last presentation, and she said, you know, I've done a degree in cosmetic technology. I'd love to actually get into IT. What do I do, sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of scope for something to give, a reskilling, maybe a short-term reskilling, because it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an expert Python programmer to be working in technology, but you might want to understand a bit about the technology and understand how your current capabilities can be used in that. And I think that transition stuff, a lot of it's happening now in various forms, through Tech Partnerships, through Julian's organisation and others. I think there's a big opportunity for that in the short term. It really is.
Julian, what would you like to see done now for the short-term need?
Apprentices. Recruit apprentices. They will be productive within a few months. There'll be a net contributor to the business, not a net cost. Yeah. Problem solved.
Nice, quick, easy answer by an apprentice. Julian, how about you on the short term?
It's not a short-term issue, but there's a lot more that corporates can do with schools and universities particularly. I know a lot's been done, but I think we could do a lot more.
Okay. Opportunity for any questions from the floor, if anyone else would. 3-4 hands went up very quickly there. We've got some microphones coming. I think the lady in the blue top at the front was probably first. Then it comes to the gentleman there.
touched on IoT, and I think that there is a real short-term need and an opportunity for courses on IoT, and not internet fridges, but the industrial IoT. We're constantly being told in the press, this is happening, quickly, it's stealth, but yet there doesn't seem, there's, a big skills shortage, and I don't see any courses anywhere that are IoT related.
Julian on that. Sure, Julian's got a comment.
Training one for Julian?
I'll get back to you on that. I don't know the response to that.
Okay.
I don't have a response.
Phil, Cisco's pushing into
there are
things
definitely courses around. I mean, but they're not. But I agree, because a lot of them are obviously kind of application specific at the moment. Is it to do with operational technology inside a manufacturing floor? How does that actually work? What are the various bits of technology in there? But I have seen a number of them around, so maybe I can keep my eyes open for them. But there's definitely starting to emerge, and I know that some of our training providers and partners are starting to put some stuff together. To be fair, it's an emerging area as well. So what are the standards that are going to be involved in healthcare, for example? What are going to be the standards if you're doing IoT and transporting cars? So there's stuff around. So a lot of it's kind of awareness at the moment, and then people starting to do it. And I think the innovation side of it's really good, because a lot of entrepreneurs, one of the things I'm certainly recommending, and we do quite a lot, because we've got a bunch of innovation centres, we take not only our own people but our customers into innovation centres working with startups, and they sort of almost teach them as they go along, saying, look, this is the way we're thinking about doing things, maybe you could do that as well. So some of the IoT aspects, it shares a little bit by doing that, so maybe that would be a short-term gap-filling way of doing it.
Okay. Anybody else, anything you'd like to add? Okay.
Another question.
Gentleman there,
To answer a couple of, this question really is to the three gentlemen on the right, because I know the one on the left. I'm one of these crazy people who've been in this industry now for just short of, over 40 years, always working for American companies. 13 of them working in Phil's company. But I graduated without an O-level, without an A-level, without a degree, and went straight into the IT industry almost as an apprentice, as you said. But went through the Cisco training of becoming a CCIE, which is industry recognized. And I want to know how much collaboration are you three guys having with the likes of Dell, Cisco, HP, because they're the people who know what they need, rather than what you want to feed them or what colleges want to feed them.
Shall I have a go at that? So everything that the tech partnership does, because it is a partnership of employers, is employer-led and employer-driven. So I won't bore you with the details, but we've been designing a whole set of new apprenticeships in new key areas like cybersecurity, which I mentioned before. And every single one of those specifications about what this thing should look like is made by employers. I'm more or less a secretary. I book a room, I get the employers come in, and they define what they need, because as you say, it's their business. On your point specifically about qualifications, one of the things that's been clear is that historically, I think, people have assumed, employers have assumed, that qualifications are a kind of the de facto way of figuring out whether people have talent in technology. I think we're beginning to rethink that. And there are employers now who are starting to say, when they bring people into apprenticeships, for example, can we have better ways of figuring out who has the right talent, the right aptitude, the right attitude, rather than necessarily always looking to see what GCSEs or A-levels they've got. So I think we're perhaps beginning to see a shift away from that, starting to think more about how we measure people's aptitude and attitudes.
Yeah, just a quick point from me. What's interesting is that I think, and I've been in the internet industry for 20 plus years, running small businesses and large ones too. And I'm always looking for the people who, not necessarily qualified in a particular way, but they have a love, a drive, an ambition, and a skill set or a mindset. I'm also seeing and speaking to organizations which are very large, and they're actually looking for, well, we don't want a big investment banking question. We don't actually want the people who've studied business studies. It's the physicists. And it's how they think and think about the world in a particular way for a particular skill set. But I think, the certifications, industry-wide certifications are very important. but they're not the only approach, and you can get into any industry by its skill and attitude alone, if you're the right, because people look for the smart people.
Okay. We've got time probably a lot more hands than we have time for questions for. I think the gentleman there, I think, was first up.
A couple of you kind of almost touched on it a little bit. I just wondered what your thoughts were around IT in general, needing to bring in more dynamic leaders that can inspire people. I think everybody that's here is probably could say that the best job they ever had was when they were working for somebody who was a really strong, dynamic person leader. And what we've got right now is we're bringing in lots of great technology leaders that aren't necessarily good people leaders. So what we're doing is we're sending people home beat up from their jobs after working lots of hours. Nobody says, oh, I want to be in technology like my dad is anymore, like they used to with firefighters and police officers and everything else. And if we were sending more people home being really happy with the job and really empowered with the job that they were doing, I think that would also help bring in the next generation of technology people, because we would then be seen as a more robust industry that people want to join, rather than just get forced into that because they were good at science and good at math. Thoughts?
I think the Generation Y that's coming through are changing that completely. If you look at how companies like Facebook and Netflix and Google are managed, I think you see quite the opposite, and Cisco perhaps as well. I disagree with what you're saying. I work for a company that's totally off the wall in that respect. I put a suit on today. I don't normally wear a suit. So I think there are companies out there that are inspiring the IT experts of tomorrow. They just have to, and I think there's going to be more of those, without a doubt.
Any other final comments from you chaps on that question?
Just fully agree.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Unfortunately, I've been given the chop sign by the organisers, so apologies to those of you who had your hands up for asking questions. Maybe try and grab some of the speakers afterwards if they have the time. Thanks very much for your questions. Just to round off, just a big thanks to our fantastic panel today. You've heard from Mick Harrison from Founders for Schools, Julian Wragg from Pluralsight, Mark Heholt for the Tech Partnership, and Phil Smith from Cisco. If you can show your appreciation, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you.